What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Reds Talk once again. James from the Muppetiers has decided to bless us with his presence and knowledge. And if you're not aware of James's work, do check his Twitter out, do check the YouTube out, because I know there's a lot of research and time that goes into it. And I know a lot of you guys would have come over from James's channel, but for our community as well, do definitely check it out. Because if you want your knowledge and you want your facts, this is the guy right here. So again, James, first and foremost, thank you for jumping on and Happy New Year, man.
Yeah, absolutely, to you as well. Definitely a lot to discuss, a lot to get into.
Yes, and that's why I'm super excited. Sam, you want to kick things off with the structure of the deal, right?
Absolutely. I think this is why I messaged James about getting him on, but you put out a thread basically of how the deal is structured, the Sir Jim Ratcliffe thing. I thought it was really interesting, especially for someone like me who doesn't understand the fucking word about finances and stuff like that, right? It's baffling to me. So as far as like when you broke it down, it was in terms of sort of shares, Class B, Class A shares, voting rights, and what would happen if Sir Jim put money into the club, how that would transfer into sort of equity. And then I believe there was a clause about if he doesn't have majority control of the club or he doesn't own the club by a certain point, he then has to sell his stuff back to the Glazers. Could you just break it down for people like me who don't understand this stuff and like where we're at with it?
Yeah. Well, I've referred myself back to that thread a few times to remind myself of everything that was going on. So let me run through some of the key kind of points here, because I know there'll be some things to break down. Number one is that it's all 6 of the Glazers selling their shares equally, not in proportion, but in number. So some of them have a bigger share than another Glazer. Doesn't matter. They're not selling like 5% of each. They're selling a specific number. The exact number doesn't really matter, but they're selling essentially a total of what gives Jim Ratcliffe 25% of those Class B shares. Those Class B shares are, usually people think Class A, Class B. They get confused because Class A sounds like it's better. It's not. Class B is the better share in this case. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Strange that.
Well, it's because Class A are the simple shares. It's basically more like those are the first shares you're going to issue. These B ones are these kind of privately held ones, but there's actually a lot more of them, and they're essentially called super voting shares. They have extra rights, all of that. And that's mostly just relevant to these board meetings, the major decisions that are being taken. So Jim Ratcliffe gets 25% of those from 6 Glazers individually. They're all cashing in on that. Ineos have, as a part of this, what are called consent rights over certain things. So consent rights mean that they are going to have to give consent for something to occur, or it cannot happen. Even as a minority owner, they have consent rights. So these things can be proposed, but they cannot happen without their say. That means it's not a voting matter. It's purely down to them. And the things that have consent rights are, number one, which was a big deal, dividends and profits for the next 3 years. That the Glazers cannot take out any dividends for the next 3 years without consent from Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And he's previously stated about football clubs that he does not believe that they should be paying dividends, that essentially they're not for profit. And remind me to come back to that, because I have some other information
Definitely.
that I haven't shared that I think would be relevant to that topic later on. So no dividends for 3 years. They also have consent rights over any separate sale of shares to anybody else for a year, meaning the Glazers cannot sell any more of their privately owned, these B shares, these voting shares, to anybody else for a year. You essentially could call that the exclusivity agreement. If you want to look at it in that way, it's exclusive. They cannot sell them to anybody else in the next year, no matter what. So that gives you, if you start to put the puzzle together, you can't profit off of owning these shares for the next 3 years. And for a year, exclusivity for Jim Ratcliffe. You start to put these little clauses together and you get a different picture than what it might look like at first. And then another important point is they have, and I believe this extends forever, right of first offer, first refusal on any of the sale of Glazer shares. So let's say in 18 months, someone comes in and says, we want to buy 51% of your shares now. We're offering $40 a share. Jim Ratcliffe can match that bid at that point in time, and they have to sell it to Jim Ratcliffe. They cannot sell it to the other people. The other thing that is important to note is that while this agreement is sort of in progress because it needs Premier League ratification, a lot of this is already agreed upon to where they cannot back out of it without massive. There's huge penalties involved, but it's not just the financial penalties. It's you're publishing this to shareholders. You're telling them this is your intention. You're committing fraud, very likely, if you start to try to change these things after the fact simply for your own benefit. It's because it's going to affect share prices and all that kind of stuff. Within 3 years of closing, the full sale would have to be at the minimum of the same price. This is effectively the Glazers protecting themselves, saying, you paid us this much for these shares. If you're going to buy more, we're going to get the minimum, the same amount. You can't come and offer lower later, and that helps negotiations. So you still need a new vote if Jim Ratcliffe has to buy more. That's important because it would push off any future legal challenges like the ones that they've been having to go through. And I will talk about that in a minute. Just a sec. Yeah. And then let's see. You have the sporting control is defined in there. And that's important too, because that's obviously a big question. People are asking, what is sporting control? What does that actually mean? What defines sporting control? And it's all defined in there, and it's answered, and it's everything. Obviously in the actual press release they put out, they said there'll be delegated control of all men's, women's, and academy matters. So it's this is not narrowed. This is not like complex. It's pretty damn simple. They're going to get to decide on everything: contracts, appointments, dismissals, everything when it comes to transfers, anything involving the football team, players, clubs, coaches. That's it. They control that. Okay. Now, one of the things is they've already put together that this is effective as of now, this part of it, where the Glazers cannot make decisions today without running it by Ineos. And so they've already given them a transfers plan that says these are the things we're going to do in the meantime until this deal is ratified and you can actually make decisions. And that's the only thing they can do. They can stick to that plan. They can't do anything else. Yeah. So that's all important. Now, I want to go back to that point that you mentioned, because this has definitely been the area of confusion. This thing about, I think people are getting mixed up, this thing about drag-along rights, where it sounds like you have to sell the shares back, things like that. There's no clause in there that forces Jim Ratcliffe to sell the shares back to the Glazers under any circumstances. They cannot force him out. The only thing that exists is after a certain period of time, if somebody else comes in and wants a full sale, not partial, not 51%, a full sale, and they want to buy all of the Glazers shares, so the 75% that's left of those super voting shares, and they agree a deal, and Jim Ratcliffe doesn't match it, then he has to include his 25% in that full sale, not to the Glazers, but to a totally new owner. So effectively, you piece this all together, and what it means is Jim Ratcliffe has his piece, the Glazers have theirs. If someone else wants to buy the club, he can match it. If he doesn't want to match it and someone else wants to buy the whole club, he will sell his shares alongside this, because any new owner is not going to come in with the same agreement that Jim Ratcliffe is running the club with only 25%. That agreement cannot survive a new owner than the Glazers coming in. You wouldn't want it to. It wouldn't make any sense to. So that's why the clause is there, that he can't just sit there. He can't prevent them from selling all of their shares, basically. But when you piece it all together, you get, Jim Ratcliffe owning 25%, controlling the football side of the club indefinitely. And the only way the Glazers can profit is by selling more shares. And Jim Ratcliffe has first right of refusal on those shares. So it's a really well-structured deal that makes it very possible for Jim Ratcliffe to buy more. And in fact, quite probable that you've got a lot of the groundwork laid for them to say, do this exact same deal 12 months from now. Again, another 25% plus one, right? to bring him to a majority control stake and to have the Glazers cash in, more on what they want. Obviously, the biggest downside is that there's no guaranteed option for purchase or anything like that. This has been essentially a problem, and it's created by the Glazers. It is what it is. It's because of this dual class share thing that they created for their own profitability, for their own control. So ultimately the blame lies with them, but they have been insanely trying to navigate this problem with these legal challenges. Even the concept of an option, right? We have an option to buy in 12 months at a specified price at a specified time. They couldn't do it. They had essentially people saying that you can't do it. We just can't do it. We're going to have lawsuits because of this. And it really comes down to the fact that having these options, because of these dual class things, because it sets a date in the future, because it affects the share price, really complex stuff that's not exciting, but it's just the fact of it. And at the end of the deal, a lot of people missed this point. There was an article in Financial Times the day that the vote happened, the day that it was actually secured, that said they didn't even have some of the people representing the minority shareholders present for this vote in the end, because they couldn't get it done. And they essentially, it's very likely from my understanding that they had to strip out at the final moments any sort of option. And it was the only way that this deal was actually going to get through the hoops and get in place. And otherwise, we'd still be talking about them sitting there trying to navigate this and figure this out from the start.
That's one fucking positive, that we're not back and forth. Is it going to be Qatar? Is it going to be Sir Jim? Is it going to be, you know, at least it's on a path now. I think that's the main kind of focus there. And you know what? Fair play to you as well, because I know this stuff. That's why I mentioned it at the start, because it takes a lot of fucking detail, like piecing together and stuff. And even things like threads and stuff, it takes a lot of effort. So, if I could I will give you a virtual round of applause for that, because it's... even still after that, I'm like, I get the majority of it, but there's still certain bits of people probably still questions and stuff. And
a lot of it doesn't matter, right? You know, I mean, for the average person, a lot of it doesn't matter.
Of course, yeah.
It doesn't mean much. It's just when you're looking at it overall on the surface, if you look at it on the surface as Jim bought 25% and that's all that's happened, it's not really the case. The thing to bear in mind, and this is a true collaboration, this isn't a hostile takeover. The Glazers are on board with all of this. They approved all of this. They accepted an offer from Jim Ratcliffe for a majority bid. The only reason it didn't happen is the legal challenges. And so they've kind of worked together to lay the framework for a deal that will have him be a majority owner in the future. And I'd be incredibly surprised if that isn't where it goes in the future, with a very much like a duplication of this deal at some point down the line.
He's done it. Sorry, Nick. He's done it with companies before, hasn't he? He's never gone into a company and just stayed a minority stake. He's always eventually ended up owning all of it, if not the majority of it. So, I'm with you. If he's getting in 25%, it's only a matter of time.
Well, in my opinion. He had to pivot in a business sense a couple of times, so it makes sense. I understand why he's gone that route. People weren't happy originally, but you can start to see some promising things now. And that's when I kind of led into my next point. There's a lot of positive talks. There's a lot of, talk about certain people coming in, recruitment, etc. But in your opinion, what are the downsides to this deal? I know, like I said, there's a lot of positive names have been mentioned and stuff, but what are the difficulties with this deal? Or maybe future hurdles that may come up, for people who are slightly worried?
For sure. I mean, obviously, the biggest thing, number one, is there's no guarantees, right?
Of course.
To change their mind and not sell in the future. How much does that matter? See, that's part of why it's such a good deal, I guess, in essence, that's been put together. They can't control the football side of the club. I'm not being a local fan. There's a little bit of a different perspective that I have on this that I'm not saying is a correct perspective. It's just a different perspective.
Of course, yeah.
The information that I've had for a long time has, I don't view the owners as problematic because of any reason except the things they do on an everyday basis to Manchester United. You could get easily a different owner who would be worse. And I know people don't believe that, but it's true. If private equity had come in for United. You know, you look at Todd Bowley, Clear Lake Capital, how that's all
Mike
going.
Ashley
You have
from Newcastle.
Yeah, you could get worse. You can have worse owners who, I'm not saying that this isn't a compliment of the Glazers. I'm saying you could easily go sideways because there's really little difference between the Glazers and, you know, a private equity fund that's coming in just to build it up and have an asset and all of that. There's very little difference. It's always been about the day-to-day, what they actually do to drive the club down. And I've tried to make it really clear way before this Ineos deal that that's the problem. Joel Glazer every single day makes decisions about United that are uninformed, unintelligent, and ultimately lead to the problems that we're facing every single day. It's not an accident. This isn't actually just due to neglect. It's not just about uncaring owners. It is the active day-to-day involvement of Joel Glazer that has caused many of the problems on the pitch that you're seeing. And so when you look at it from a football perspective, simply putting in place a proper structure and letting it run it and not micromanaging every detail from somebody who is not an expert is
that enough, do you think?
I think it's enough. There's one caveat, which I'll talk about, which is the only real big negative. It is enough because United have biggest revenues, or close to the biggest revenues, or they should have the biggest revenues.
Not according to Man City, we don't.
Even decent if they were decent on the pitch, let's say, okay? Because the difference in the revenues comes down to the fact that they're missing on Champions League regularly every other year, missing the later rounds. We're losing 40, 50 million this year by being knocked out early of these cups and all of the things. A lot of the revenue comes down to that. Should have the biggest revenue, should have the biggest resources, which means if you can make the best decisions, you should have the best club. You should have the best results on the pitch. So it should be enough that the best people being put in place to make the right football decisions result in success on the pitch. There's obviously the off-the-pitch stuff that does require investment, the training ground, the stadium, the things that require money that are, and this is where the negative kind of can come in, the only negative. What's the budget? What is the budget that gets set? What is how much funds are allocated? Where is further investment? Now, again, you have the positive that Jim Ratcliffe's already putting in the other 300 million towards that infrastructure, which is a step in that direction. And obviously, I believe as he becomes a greater owner, he will put in more and more and more for more equity. But the only point, again, why this is such a well-structured deal is, let's say they bring in 750 million. Why would they not spend the 750? They cannot take dividends. They cannot make profit for 3 years. And so even the question of budget, it's in their best interest to spend all that money. Otherwise, you're paying taxes without taking any money out.
Yeah.
Is that why
you don't want that business?
Is that why they gave Sporting control? Because they knew this dividend thing was part of the condition. So it's like, well, if that's the part of the condition, we might as well just give them the Sporting control because they've got no use for it, have they?
They don't. And so when you really look at it, to every argument, there's kind of a counter within this deal. Yeah. And that is why it's a really good deal from Jim Ratcliffe, considering the circumstances. It's not the ideal deal, but it's probably the only deal that could have got done. So why would they not spend a budget if they can't take any money out? They've got to. They've got to spend the money. They want the club to be at essentially no profit, no loss for the next 3 years. And that means spending every cent and not more than that. And that's true. They're not going to be pumping money in, but Jim Ratcliffe is. And so I hope it's enough. But obviously the downside is, do they change their mind at some point? 3 years from now, do they just say, do they just deny any offer from Jim Ratcliffe for the next 3 years and hold on to it? I don't think so. And even if they did, would we see better results over the next 3 years? Probably much better with the football control and all of that. But obviously it could get very messy if they start having these disagreements with him. Yeah, and that's the only risk I see. But at the same time, this is the only way that the Glazers are going to profit off of this business. If you look at them as, in a really straightforward sense, they just want to make money. That's a downside, and it's a positive because you can think with how they think. They just want money.
Yeah.
Nobody else was offering more for this club. It was 2 people. That was it. They didn't get a bunch of offers. And the Qatari bid was about $1 billion lower than Jim Ratcliffe. So where are you turning to? This is your only hope. This is the only guy who's going to give you the money you want. So in that sense, I don't think they're going to go against their own self-interest, basically.
We've just had a super chat. Sorry, see, James, how will Ratcliffe invest in the squad if it is his own money or Ineos? And if anything happens to Ratcliffe, who would own the 25% shareholders on Ineos? Thanks. That's from Rush Mainu. Thank you very much for the super chat. Just before you answer that question as well, James, everyone in the chat, we have just gifted some memberships. I'm not sure who's been the recipients of them kind of gifts, but there you go, free membership for you guys. Please do leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I appreciate a lot of you come over from James, but yeah, go for it, James.
Yeah, really, really good question, because that was one of the things I think I wanted to remind you to take me back to. So what I was told is that obviously on Monday or Tuesday, I learned that Jim Ratcliffe was flying into Manchester and would be visiting this week. And obviously he's been having these talks at Carrington and Old Trafford and such. He's going to be meeting with people. He's going to be meeting with Patrick Stewart, I believe, before he leaves. And there's a lot more to come that I can't get into at the moment. Some of this stuff will just have to stay private. But suffice it to say, at the moment, plans are being laid, the plans that have been drawn up. And my understanding is that Jim Ratcliffe has communicated to some people pretty high up already that he intends to use his own money to bring this club back to where it's supposed to be. He's never going to take any money out of the club. He's going to put his money in and continue to do so to make this happen and to get where he wants to go. There's going to be changes. I mean, there's going to be changes. He's made that clear to people. Obviously, he's not talking to the whole staff in this big room and telling them, hey, a lot of you are going to lose your job. But the fact is, it's the reality. There's going to be major changes across the board. And he's made this clear to people in this visit. And essentially very soon it's going to be laid out who they intend to put in place as far as directors and things like that, so that they're ready.
4 names, James. 4 names.
4 names. I mean, the names that are out there are mostly correct.
Concrete.
When you talk about Ashworth, Mitchell, and them, I think those are the most likely candidates. Obviously, you've had Dougie Freeman named. There's other people too. I mean, there's a lot of options here. They cannot really. I say they cannot really start, but they kind of can and have, but they can't talk to people. Like they can't talk to Ashworth. Right, Ashworth's in a job. They can't really approach him at the moment. Mitchell's not. They have had discussions with him. It's a little bit tricky in that respect, so that'll come clear. But they're going to make it clear to say this is the structure we want. This is the layout we want. These are the responsibilities we want. Just to answer that other part of that question before I forget, it's written into that deal that the Ineos, the shares that are purchased by actually Trawlers Limited, right, as a company, would go to the other people, which I believe are the other 2 partners of Ineos. Reese and Curry are the other 2 partners of Ineos with Jim Ratcliffe. So they would have the shares. It would stay within the same group of people, descendants. There's things in there where the shares can transfer to Jim Ratcliffe's descendants as well, as because he has 2 sons who both work in Ineos, I believe, as well. And Curry and Reese, the Class B shares could go to them without converting. Essentially, that's built in there. So it wouldn't be lost if anything happened.
Okay.
Should we pivot to the burning question at the minute?
Yes.
All over Twitter. It may well be done by the time this show finishes, but Jadon Sancho, he seems like he's all but out the door on loan to Borussia Dortmund. It seems like a no-risk deal for Dortmund. I think they paid about 2.5 million total for a 6-month thing, and United are probably footing most of his wages. Is United hedging their bets here to get rid of a toxic, I use the term toxic in quotations, player out the door that may or may not be affecting the squad? And then if he plays well and he performs for Dortmund, they could then have a sellable asset in the summer, which is probably when all this restructure comes in. They start like restructuring the squad. Or is it like a sort of hedging their bet from United that if Ten Hag doesn't make it and ends up being sacked or like whatever before the end of the summer, he can then come back to the squad and they haven't lost a £70 million player? What's happening with this deal? Do you know the thinking behind it? Do you know anything that hasn't been put out in terms of like it, or is it just a simple, we need to get him away from the club right now?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit of both. and it offers some flexibility. I know that Ineos in particular were pretty unhappy with this. They haven't influenced this deal much, to be very clear. Okay, this has been in the intention for some time, as soon as possible get him on loan. What I will be very curious to see is if there's an option or not. Originally, Dortmund were looking at around 30 million. That's all that they wanted to offer. That's all they were willing to look at as an option. For them, that's like a high transfer, so it kind of makes sense. They tend to buy low and sell high, obviously. That's it. United had been exploring whether anybody was going to offer an obligation. Obviously, that gives you a huge FFP space, wages, sale, all of that. There wasn't a lot of interest in it. So as it stands currently, I think it's pretty nailed on to happen to Dortmund. I mean, I think it's going to happen. It's been in the works a while. But it's both. I mean, it's both. It's at the end of the day, I think it's you have a player, potentially significant asset on a lot of wages, who's doing nothing right now. If he goes and does well, you win on two fronts. Either you can sell him, get a lot of money in summer for him to somebody, or you can bring him back and he solves the problem. Either one works. If he goes and he performs poorly, you're in the same position you are now. So there's literally no downside given the present situation to this deal, and it affords the flexibility. And that's why I'm curious if there's an option. If United agree to an option of below 30 million or something like that to Dortmund, it will tell you that the view is, including Ineos, is we don't care if he leaves in summer. We don't view him as a future player. He can go one way or another. It's fine. If there's no option, then I think it's clear that they are not convinced of the situation, or there's just not a good offer for it. But it would leave a little bit more flexibility, and obviously a lot of that's going to come down to the manager situation, which is definitely another major topic.
Well, I was going to ask about that right-hand side, but I would rather ask about the management situation, because I think this thing with Graham Potter at the moment is fascinating, and I'm interested to know why. I mean, I don't know if you have the answer or not, but I'm interested to know why it is Ineos' number one choice. He obviously done well at Brighton. I think his time at Chelsea had like the joint lowest total of points. What do you think it is? Why are they so keen on Graham Potter, and why is there a lot of noise around this at the moment?
Well, I'm not sure they're as keen as it appears to be. It's just the only name that the media have been given, or that they've discovered, I should say, and so it's one that comes out. And so if you're only hearing one name, then you're going to think that they're keen on that name in particular. I have to be a little delicate with this whole situation with the manager thing. I've been asked to be delicate. Quite literally, I've been asked to be delicate about the whole manager situation. Because I've known, and I think I've mentioned it even on my own videos in brief, very, very delicately, almost 3 months ago, that Ineos had already been looking at contingency plans, for the manager situation. And I've tried to drop a lot of hints, call it advice, to Erik Ten Hag, that he will have to accept significant changes in his role. Something I've been going on about for a few months now. He will have to accept significant changes to his role if he wants to be the manager of United under Ineos. And I think you're seeing some things kind of reflect that. There's articles from ESPN, from James Stucture, Telegraph, and others talking about how he doesn't want to give up control of recruitment, things like that. But Ineos view that as an abject failure. The recruitment structure at United is the worst possible thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
And that the agreements they've known for months, the agreements in place will not work. They're not going to accept them. They will not accept the current structure of things in the current agreements. You don't bring in Dan Ashworth, Paul Mitchell, these types of people to say, you know what? All that work you're doing,
don't worry about it.
veto.
Yeah,
no, not going to accept it.
Never going to happen.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And there's little evidence that anyone at United deserves any sort of influence in this area. The decision making has been horrific across the board. I'm not going to pin the blame on any particular person. It's real funny because under prior managers, under like, for instance, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, there were some incredible ideas that they had that were superseded by Joel and Ed Woodward at the time. And under this manager, they've stayed out of it.
That's a name to blame. Ed Woodward. Blame that guy.
I know. I know. It's been a mess. They just flip-flop between things. And so, partially, it suited them to put it all on Ten Hag, and he's done a poor job of it. But it suits them to do that too, to put him as the fall guy for it as well. There's always another one. But that doesn't mean he should maintain any sort of control of it either. It's not a good situation. And so that's the major factor. It was sort of regardless of results. That is the major factor. It's a different role. And the results have been bad. So in terms of an audition, I mean, the way to look at it is it's not about Ineos want to come in and sack a manager if there's a change. It's new management. He's not their manager. He's not their guy. So is he going to work as their guy? Is he the best guy for them? Don't know. And per the agreements, first he would have to accept doing things the way that they want to be their guy, because they would never have offered him the terms he got in his job. And two, he's kind of has to audition to show he's doing it as well. And right now that's failing pretty heavily. So I don't think they want to make a change mid-season. They never intended to. They wanted to give him the season to see if results improve, but mostly so they can put in the directors and the people that they want to talk about. But there's contingencies, and it's not just Graham Potter, and that's not even that recent. That's a few months. They spoke to Graham Potter a few months ago while assessing other names as well. What's that?
Was that to be manager of Nice? I saw a story they were looking at.
Yeah, there was that, but they spoke to him about the United job.
Okay.
There are people who have spoken to him about the United job, but it was some months ago. And it was alongside other names, other candidates, other people as well that they're looking at. And there's been some stories. There was a story from the Times, for example, that United really didn't like, which said Erik Ten Hag was on thin ice. Now, the Times are extremely well connected into Ineos. And so, yeah, the current management weren't going to sack Ten Hag, and that was not true. But that's not really what they were saying. It's not really the point that they were making either. There are people sort of separate to the current management of United, even up at the directorship level, that are already and have been talking to Ineos for some time and advising and working with them on coming in. And I mean really way up there, board level type of stuff. They've been meeting with Joe Glazer. They've been, and so when you take info for someone like that who's extremely well plugged into Ineos side of things, it's different. It's like it's a different level of information that wouldn't be true for people on the ground, for Murtaugh, for anyone below Richard Arnold. It's not true. It was not there anymore, of course. But at the time, for anyone below Richard Arnold, that information wouldn't have been true. But it's above their heads. It's different. It's different tiers of info, and that's how crazy this all gets. And they mentioned names like Ruben Amorim, and I do believe that is a name that has been assessed as well. There's more. And I would say that right now I don't want to talk about it too much.
Of course.
Because there's not a decision that's been made about Ten Hag, and he's the current manager of United. And I think he will get the season. And then we'll see after that. So
you've kind of covered my next question, which was going to be on like this sort of power struggle. Like if Ineos come in with this new structure and stuff like that, obviously Ten Hag's been given this extreme amount of power, which may not be advisable in the future, and I think that they were trying to recreate Fergie in some way, but football's moved on. So I was just going to ask you about that power struggle and stuff like that, but I think you've kind of covered that as it was, because Ajax, he was more of a tracksuit manager, wasn't he? Like he was on the pitch, his tactics, and he had Overmars, Van der Sar, and a couple of other people doing everything for him. And United's been very different, and I think that's been part of the downfall. I think of Erik Ten Hag. I think he's been given far too much power and too much influence on the overhaul.
He needs people to answer to, doesn't he? That's the main thing in any walk of life.
And the problem is that he asked for it. Yeah. I referred back to stories originally. He wouldn't have taken the job without it, and some of that's understandable. Some of it isn't. It depends how much he knew, because there's a lot of really good people at United from a recruitment standpoint, and I've tried to point that out for some time, for years. I'll give you, a little story on this. I got a list of 6 people in the beginning of 2021 that United were scouting, and on that list was Darwin Nunez, Anthony, Michael Elise, and 3 other players. And this was just a list of 3 players they're looking at for forward position, or 6 players they're looking at for forward positions. The 2 players that they decided that were worth potentially buying in the future were Darwin Nunez and Michael Elise. Anthony, they had decided in 2021 was not good enough.
25 million.
Not a player that they should
Probably
buy.
right,
like,
to be honest with you.
He's worth 25 million, and they were like, yeah, let's not.
Yeah. And then
Ridiculous.
14 months later, they pay, 18 months later, they paid 85 million for him. There's smart people at United who made good decisions, and they would have gone for Michael Elise based on that recommendation, who's a fantastic player and had a 35 million release clause, up until last summer. I mean, come on.
Probably double that now.
And then you talk about, there's so much that could go into to Declan Rice, to the recommendations. There have been a lot of good recommendations over the years.
Julian Alvarez from
we should have listened. There's so many people we should have listened to. Let's put it that way. And a lot of it's the fault of Joe Glazer. A lot of it's the fault of Ed Woodward. But Ten Hag coming in and demanding that kind of power, superseding these people, was not smart of him as well. I don't know how much he knew. I don't know if he knew, hey, there've been a lot of good recommendations. Why don't you come in and listen to those people? I wish he had. Because it would have been better for everybody.
Well, Chivy, who's part of our channel, we made a good point on a couple of videos ago, a long time ago. Being a United scout must be the easiest job in the world, because nobody's ever taken your fucking call, are they? Like, you're literally just on a beach in South America looking at players. It's like, they're not going to listen to me. I could type whatever I want. Don't really matter, because they don't listen to a word they say. So
that's been the communication, isn't it? Just that's been a huge issue for a long time. Sam, just before you get into the transfer window, there is a super chat from Angie S. Thank you very much for that. Saying, James, how do you think Ineos will approach sales of crap players like Antony? Will they just want to ship players that the new structure doesn't rate, irrespective of the price, or will they do things like sending them on loan?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because obviously you have to factor in, you want to sell. Can you sell?
Antony, no. Depends how much you're selling for.
That's essentially the biggest problem, right? Is that, what you want to sell, can you sell? That's the issue, and that's what they're going to run into, I think, overall. They will want to get rid of anybody that they can. They will want to get rid of anybody that they can for this. And I think their intention is to be pretty ruthless on that front. Sell, even if you're taking a loss, you're still in a better position. They're trying to give themselves as much FFP space as possible to do a full rebuild.
Just get the wages off the books, basically.
Yeah. And so I think that I don't think they're going to hold on to players. When you look at things like the +1s that they're giving to Lindelof, to Wan-Bissaka and such. These are advisable because, one, you take the center back situation. Part of the issue is you have Lisandro Martinez, who's had 2 foot surgeries, Rafael Varane, who doesn't want to be at United anymore, effectively, and Harry Maguire is up in the air. He's had a good season, I think, for United, but it's still up in the air as to his future and his suitability for being a top level center back for the long term, right? You don't have a single center back to rely on. You can't replace 4. So keeping Lindelof for 1 year
security
on relatively decent language, it's fine. And if a sale comes up and a good offer comes in, great. Wan-Bissaka is the same. You don't know that Dalot is convincing at all. Nobody's convinced by Diogo Dalot.
Nope.
Wan-Bissaka is a good player to have in your squad.
Unique.
He's a good player to have in your squad because he brings something somebody else isn't going to bring. He can shut a player down. He can do that. It's good because you don't want to have to buy 2 right backs right now. And there are positions where they're going to have to buy a lot of players. And there's a lot of money that's going to have to be spent. But it gives you flexibility. It also gives you the ability to assess these players under another full season. Maybe under a new manager, but at least under a new structure and under a new plan and under a new setup and in a new team, and see how they do. So I think they'll keep some of the depth so that you're not having to buy depth, which has been an error United have made in the past, is constantly buying depth players and not first teamers, and then try to save the money that they have to spend on transfers for the names they need at the top of the chart, basically.
There's a lot of people shocked in the comments saying, "What? Varane wants to leave? Does he?" The first they fucking heard about it. But you said that last time he was on. I remember you saying it.
Times. Yeah. He's very disillusioned with United and with the manager too. I mean, he just is. You know, he's not happy with the situation. Whether it's tactical or not, he doesn't like not being Ten Hag's choice. You know, being picked.
Of course,
Johnny Evans picked over him. You know, over and over for a few months. It's just the reality of it. He thinks he's got a lot left to do. He doesn't even want to go to Saudi. He wants to stay in Europe. You know, Varane doesn't think his career is finished, and he's had injury issues and all that. But no, he doesn't really want to be at United. Obviously, he's a free agent right now. He could agree a new deal. He could agree a deal with anybody in Europe at the moment, and he'd be gone in summer. That could happen, and that's not an accident. I don't think that Ineos or anybody are opposed to that. Big, huge wages.
Of course.
You know, 350K coming off of the books, 300K coming off the books. You know, you go buy someone like you go buy someone like, you know, Braithwaite from Everton. Even if he costs 70 million, he's only going to be on 75, 100. Yeah. You're covered. You've covered the deal for a brand new center back who has resale value, who's young, who's got everything with that. So, you know, I think that it's sort of, if he wants to stay on lower wages, cool, we'll make it work. But you're not going to be first choice necessarily, and so, you know, you're free to explore what's out there for you. Otherwise, if there's a better offer.
Well, speaking of sales and buying, January window, we're in silly season officially. I've seen some names dotted about, which I'm just like, why have they got?
Mola, Erno, all these guys.
Like, there's some weird shit going on. Lots of rumours. Especially about United. Obviously, FFP, United haven't got any money. There's most of the articles are basically saying if there's anybody coming in, it's going to be a loan, maybe one or two max. And obviously with Sancho going on loan, that's probably one of United's most sellable assets to get FFP and back and stuff like that. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe not coming in and being ratified officially yet, so he can't inject cash in. Is that the case for United? Like, is it just going to be one or two loans, or are United finally actually playing the cards close to the chest and going, all right, we're going to play the game a little bit? Because most of the time when Wood was in charge, he'd be like, we're going to spend this, we've got this amount of money, and everybody would know exactly, and then they just rack the price up. So is that the case, or are United actually playing the game a little bit here and sort of being savvy about it?
No, I don't think there's too much more than meets the eye on this. I think for a long time, the information I was given from Ineos too is summer. They have big plans for summer. You know, there's a few factors in this. There's the financial factor of it, which is a factor. There's also just, are the players you want to get available, and is it worth filling up the team, wages, or anything for a season that's effectively over? I mean, I don't mean to be negative about it, but
that's true.
What are we playing for this season, you know? At this
just to reply to you on that, though, if obviously getting back into the Champions League would be hugely significant in terms of financial revenue, right? So would they not look at that as like a reason to maybe inject a bit of cash in January?
It matters a bit and it doesn't. It gives you a little bit of space, but with the investment coming this year, it hardly makes a difference. They're going to be able to spend a lot of money no matter what happens.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it. With the FFP space they're getting, it doesn't really matter. Here's the issue, right? So let's take Champions League. The difference between Champions League, if you go out in the groups like we have, versus getting further in Europa is minimal. It's a few million, maybe 10 million, 15 million. If you buy a single player for 20 million and put them on 100K, you've committed 45 million on that player. And that's not a significant player either. Buying in January, unless you are sure this is a guy for the next 5 years, we know we want, part of our long-term plans, just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. For salvaging one season or the rest of a season, it just doesn't make sense. So a couple of loans at best, I think is the probability of the situation.
Yeah, interesting. Another kind of Vegas and Sabitzer January, it seems like.
Yeah, and like there's Werner, who's been discussed as a legitimate name. I don't know that that's gonna happen. It's a real name. He has other options too. I don't know that there's a point in signing Timo Werner, to be quite honest.
He's played 4 games for Leipzig this season, man.
If you want to sort your fucking goal scoring issues out,
you don't buy Timo Werner. It doesn't make sense.
I've been on fire and someone's spraying fucking aftershave and saying, "Yeah, mate." Like,
we already got a striker who couldn't score a goal last year on loan. Yeah, I just don't see the point.
Bizarre, very bizarre to me.
It doesn't make sense. There's obviously a lot of talk of that. The other player from Germany, Guirassy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mostly agent. I mean, it's played up by the agent. There's been minimal contact. There's other deals in the works for him. I think he's going to end up going elsewhere. But
a lot of people talking. Sorry, I was just going to mention Zambrano. Yeah. A lot of people mention Zambrano as well.
I don't bite on a lot of these little South American linked players, to be quite honest. One of the major problems is it's incredibly difficult for them to get a work permit in England.
Caicedo had that issue, right?
Fucking Brexit.
Caicedo had these certain international appearances and such that allowed it to work, and tournament appearances to accumulate the number of points. A lot of them don't. A lot of the little players being linked, I don't even think they could get a work permit. They have to go somewhere else for a while. That's why you see them go to Portugal and such very often for a few years. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good place to end, to be fair. You've covered a lot of topics, considering 40 odd minutes is a lot of detail there, which we always get with you, which is why we always love having you on, because it's insightful, people get what they want, and it's straight to the point. So thank you as always, James. I imagine you're going to be busy, especially over the next 6 months with this kind of Ineos thing, the January window. Of course, your podcast. Yes. Are you still doing podcasts or just solo YouTube?
Yeah. No. We just the holidays, kids being out of school, bills. So I just got back to work. I think the kids are still home for Phil, and we'll be back next week on the regular podcast as well.
Love to hear that. Go check James out. Obviously, a lot of you have come over from James' kind of group, but do check him out from our community. Make sure you leave a like on the video for us if you can, and subscribe if you've liked the content. Will be live again tomorrow night with a members video and a new show. And if you want to become a member, click the link in the bio. Just like £3 a month, just supports the channel. You get exclusive content, some perks, etc. Me, Sam, and James will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone. Peace.
Bye.
And we want plays out. We want plays out. And we want plays out. We want plays out.